Imagine you're trapped on a wooden pirate ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's past midnight. The wind is freezing, your clothes are completely soaked, and the only thing separating you from the icy sea is a few wooden planks. There's no heater, no waterproof jacket, no sleeping bag. So, how did ancient pirates stay warm on freezing nights without freezing to death? The answer is far more ingenious than most people realize. Today, if you're cold, you simply go inside, turn on the heat, or wrap yourself in a blanket. But for pirates, there was no escape. The ocean surrounded them in every direction, and once the sun disappeared, the real battle began. Surprisingly, many pirates survived winters at sea. Not because they were tougher than us, but because they understood something about surviving the cold that most people today never have to think about. The first thing to understand is that the ocean makes cold far more dangerous than land. Most people imagine pirates sailing through warm Caribbean waters under bright sunshine. While that certainly happened, it wasn't the whole story. Pirate ships also crossed the North Atlantic, sailed along the coasts of Europe, and ventured into waters where winter nights were brutally cold. Even in milder climates, the combination of wind, seawater, and darkness could quickly become life-threatening. And here's the strange part. The air temperature wasn't always the biggest problem. The wind was. Modern weather forecasts often mention something called the feels-like temperature. A cold wind strips away the thin layer of warm air surrounding your body, making you lose heat much faster than still air. Sailors experienced this every single night. On the open sea, there were no buildings, hills, or forests to block the wind. It blew across hundreds of miles of open water before slamming directly into the ship. Every gust stole more body heat, and the faster the ship sailed, the worse it became. But even that wasn't their biggest problem. Their clothes were almost always wet. Every wave that crashed over the deck sprayed salty seawater onto the crew. Rainstorms could drench them for hours. Even heavy ocean mist slowly soaked through their clothing. Unlike today, pirates couldn't simply open a dry backpack and change into fresh clothes. For many sailors, the clothes they wore during the day were the exact same clothes they slept in that night. And wet clothing is dangerous because water removes heat from your body around 25 times faster than air. Even if the temperature wasn't below freezing, damp clothes combined with strong wind could pull heat away so quickly that a sailor might begin shivering within minutes. The harder pirates worked during the day, the worse the nights often became. Climbing rigging, pulling heavy ropes, raising sails, and pumping water out of the ship left them exhausted and soaked with both seawater and sweat. By sunset, many crews weren't just tired. They were already cold. You might think the obvious solution would be simple. Why didn't they just light a big fire? It sounds logical. Until you remember one important detail. Their entire home was made of dry wood. Lighting a fire on a pirate ship sounds like common sense, until you realize it was one of the fastest ways to kill everyone on board. Almost every part of the ship was made from wood. The decks, the walls, the cabins, even the barrels that carried their food and drinking water. Above them hung enormous canvas sails coated with tar, while thick ropes stretched from mast to mast. A single stray spark landing in the wrong place could turn the entire ship into a floating inferno. And unlike a house on land, there was nowhere to run. If the ship burned, everything burned with it. That's why fires were kept under strict control. Larger ships sometimes had a small galley where meals could be prepared, but the fire was carefully contained, constantly watched, and often extinguished after cooking. It wasn't something sailors gathered around for warmth, so every evening, pirates faced the same impossible problem. They were freezing, yet the one thing that could warm them might also destroy the ship. Their first solution wasn't fire, it was clothing, but not the kind of clothing Hollywood usually shows. In movies, pirates often wear light cotton shirts with open jackets because they look adventurous on screen. Real sailors cared much less about looking impressive and much more about surviving the night. Wool became one of their greatest allies. Unlike cotton, wool continues to trap warm air even after becoming damp. It isn't magic. It still gets wet, but it loses its insulating ability much more slowly than many other fabrics available at the time. That single advantage could make the difference between an uncomfortable night and a dangerous one. Whenever they expected colder weather, sailors layered their clothing instead of relying on one thick garment. A linen shirt might sit closest to the body, followed by a wool vest or jacket, and finally a heavy sea coat designed to block as much wind as possible. But even layers had limits. After hours of rain or waves crashing over the deck, every piece of clothing eventually became soaked. So pirates developed another strategy. They tried to stay out of the wind whenever possible. During the day, much of the crew had to remain on deck to handle the sails and watch for danger. But once their duties ended, many moved below deck where the wooden hull blocked at least some of the relentless wind. Was it comfortable? Not even close. The air below deck was cramped, humid, and often smelled of damp wood, salt, food, and unwashed bodies. Yet compared with standing outside in freezing wind, it felt almost luxurious. And this leads to another question. How did pirates actually sleep? Most people imagine rows of wooden beds. In reality, many sailors slept in hammocks suspended from beams overhead. At first glance, a hammock doesn't seem warmer than a bed. But it solved a problem people rarely think about. A wooden deck became extremely cold during the night. If you slept directly on it, your body continuously transferred heat into the timber beneath you. A hammock lifted sailors into the air, reducing that direct contact with the freezing deck and helping them conserve precious body heat. It wasn't designed as a heating system, but it made surviving the night just a little easier. Unfortunately, even hammocks couldn't solve the crew's biggest enemy. The biggest enemy wasn't the cold, it was the wind. Sailors had a saying, "The wind cuts deeper than the sea." And after spending just one freezing night on the open ocean, it was easy to understand why. Unlike on land, the wind at sea never seemed to stop. It rushed across hundreds of miles of open water before crashing into the ship, finding every gap in a sailor's clothing. Even if two nights had exactly the same temperature, the windy one always felt far colder. Modern scientists call this wind chill. Your body naturally creates a thin layer of warm air around your skin. Strong wind constantly strips that layer away, forcing your body to replace it over and over again. The harder the wind blows, the faster you lose heat. Pirates didn't know the science behind it, but they understood the danger from experience. That's why sailors often curled into tight positions while resting, keeping their arms and legs close to their bodies to reduce exposed skin. Whenever possible, they sheltered behind barrels, cargo, or parts of the ship that blocked the wind. Every little bit mattered, and sometimes, even that wasn't enough. During violent winter storms, freezing rain and giant waves crashed over the deck hour after hour. Within minutes, every sailor was soaked from head to toe, their boots filled with icy seawater. Their jackets became heavier with every wave. Some even found ice forming on ropes, sails, and railings as temperatures continued to fall. Imagine trying to sleep after spending hours in conditions like that. Yet the crew couldn't simply decide to rest. Someone always had to remain awake. Pirate ships operated around the clock. Crews were divided into watches, taking turns guarding the ship, steering, adjusting sails, and looking for enemy vessels or dangerous weather. While one group tried to recover below deck, another stood outside facing the freezing darkness. There was no such thing as a full night's sleep for everyone. But here's something that surprises many people. Many pirates didn't try to stay warm alone. Below deck, space was incredibly limited. Hammocks were hung only inches apart, and sailors often slept shoulder to shoulder. It wasn't about friendship or comfort, it was simple survival. A cramped sleeping area trapped more body heat than a person sleeping alone in open air. What sounds unpleasant today could make a noticeable difference during a freezing night at sea. Then there was another belief you've probably heard before. Rum keeps you warm. Movies love this idea. A pirate drinks a large mug of rum, smiles, and suddenly seems ready to face the freezing wind. But the truth is almost the opposite. Alcohol creates the feeling of warmth because it widens blood vessels near your skin, sending warm blood toward the surface. For a few moments, you genuinely feel warmer. The problem is that this also causes your body to lose heat faster into the cold air. In other words, rum could trick you into thinking you were getting warmer while your body was actually cooling down even faster. That doesn't mean pirates never drank rum. They absolutely did. But they drank it for morale, celebration, and sometimes because stored water had gone stale after weeks at sea, not because it was an effective way to survive freezing nights. When it came to staying alive, experience mattered far more than alcohol. By now, you can probably see a pattern. There wasn't one secret that kept pirates warm. It was dozens of small decisions working together. Layering wool instead of lighter fabrics. Staying below deck whenever duties allowed. Sleeping in hammocks instead of directly on the freezing planks. Keeping as dry as possible. Working in rotating watches so not everyone had to face the wind all night. None of these methods were perfect on their own, but together they gave crews just enough of an advantage to survive another night. And sometimes, even that wasn't enough. Historical records from the Age of Sail describe sailors losing fingers and toes to frostbite after voyages through northern waters. Others became dangerously weak from prolonged exposure to cold and damp conditions. The sea didn't need to sink a ship to kill its crew, Sometimes it simply wore them down one freezing night at a time. That's one of the biggest misconceptions about pirate life. Movies usually portray their greatest danger as naval battles, sea monsters, or buried treasure. But for most sailors, the ocean itself was the real enemy. It didn't need cannons. It didn't need swords. It simply waited. Every freezing gust of wind, every crashing wave, every sleepless night slowly pushed the human body closer to its limits. Surviving wasn't about courage alone, it was about discipline, preparation. So the next time you pull a blanket over yourself on a cold night, remember this. Centuries ago, thousands of pirates faced that same cold with nothing but wool clothing, a swaying hammock, and a wooden ship drifting through an endless ocean. They couldn't turn up a thermostat. They couldn't climb into a warm bed. They simply endured the night, hoping the sunrise would come before the cold won. If you enjoyed uncovering the forgotten realities of pirate life, consider subscribing.